it's your girl, Giddy Nakasta, and you are listening to GuildCast.
GuildCast is a weekly podcast series based on the 3 pillars of the Graphic Artists Guild: advocacy, community, and business resources. Keep listening to learn more about the Graphic Artists Guild and visit our website at www.graphicartistsguild.org.
Yeah, and so I guess that's kind of like what happened with the Case Act.
Well, the Case Act, actually, yes, you're correct on that. The Copyright Office noticed that, or heard from people like us who were responding to their notices, that there was a real problem that people with really small copyright claims, like if I put a logo that on a T-shirt that I'm selling, and somebody steals my logo and sticks it on their T-shirt that they're selling, that the most I can get as just a little graphic designer is for that copyright infringement is it is a few $1,000s if the person who's stolen it is just another person like me.
Each week, GuildCast features episodes based on advocacy, community, and business resources. Guild Advocacy Liaison Rebecca Blake is a graphic designer living and working in New York City with more than a decade of knowledge and experience fighting for the rights of graphic artists everywhere. She was also instrumental in how the Guild participated in getting the Case Act bill passed after 15 years. Listen this week in Advocacy as Rebecca talks the Guild and advocacy.
All right, guys, so shout outs and welcome to the GuildCast. This week we are with Rebecca as she talks advocacy. We're going to let Rebecca introduce herself because she is just such a pro at advocacy and advocating for artists' rights. So we're actually going to send it on over to her. But our first question before anything is, what does advocacy mean? In particular, what does it mean to advocate for graphic artists?
Hey, Camille. So my name is Rebecca Blake to everybody out there, and I'm the advocacy liaison for the Graphic Artists Guild. So I'm on the Guild National Board, and I'm involved with this thing called advocacy. And that's a good question because a lot of people aren't really sure what advocacy means. To advocate is to speak on behalf of someone or to speak publicly and on behalf of a cause. So the Guild is really involved with advocacy for graphic artists, for designers and illustrators. And it's kind of to the core of our mission. Our mission says that the Guild promotes and protects the economic interests of graphic artists. So to advocate for graphic artists means to make sure we can all do our jobs, earn a living, and get treated with some respect. Does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Taking it back to the definition definitely helps because I feel like sometimes when people hear the word advocate, they're like, wait, what does that mean? But specifically for graphic artists, what does that mean? Especially as an organization like the Guild, what does that mean to advocate for graphic artists? And what kind of work does the Guild do to advocate for artists?
Well, that's really okay. So think about it this way. The Guild is an association for professional graphic artists and for people who are coming up in the industry. We have students as well. So to advocate means to make sure that we can run our businesses and we can develop our craft, we can do our creative work, and we can do it in an environment that is fair and supportive. So what that specifically means for the Guild is there's some really broad areas where the Guild as an organization advocates. And so what I do as an advocacy liaison is I help coordinate on legislation that the Guild is in support of. Those are laws that will help graphic artists. We do a lot of work where we engage with the Copyright Office. We respond to notices that the Copyright Office puts out, or will support, will sign on to amicus briefs if an amicus brief is really relevant to graphic artists. So that's the kind of the hardcore advocacy work the Guild does. But the Guild is a broader organization. In so many things we do, we advocate as well. I mean, a lot of my colleagues on the board are involved with producing webinars, or Camille, like you're doing this podcast. And so what the Guild as an organization does is it wants to help educate or instruct, share knowledge with graphic artists on how they can talk to clients, on how they can, take a look and see, are their contracts fair? Take a look and see what's happening in their local communities. Are there things coming up that are unfair to creative workers or unfair to small businesses? So the Guild as an organization, the entire board, everybody is kind of involved in advocacy work one way or another. And ultimately, what we hope is that Guild members become their own best advocates. And they can do that on a one-on-one relationship with the client, where they can defend the price that they're asking for, or ask the client to adhere to really fair practices, or they can take the initiative. And we've even had Guild members come up and come to National and say, did you know this is happening? And in that case, we're educated by the members on what we as an organization need to do.
Yeah, that's true. That makes sense. So then why is it so important that the Guild advocates on copyright issues specifically?
Copyright is kind of the engine for the creative class, the engine for creative workers.
Right, of course.
So if you're a creator, like a musician or an illustrator or a writer, as soon as you put what your creation in tangible form, you write it on your computer, or you make a drawing on a pad of paper, whatever, that work, that original work you created is copyrighted to you. You're the one who owns the right to copyright. And you can license that right. So you can, if somebody loves your illustration and they want to put it on their shopping bag, you can to them. You can tell them you can do this for a certain amount of money and over a certain period of time. And that's your copyright. And copyright is so important to creators that it's actually written into the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the United States says copyright exists for the promotion of economic development, essentially. And that's why we advocate so strongly on copyright issues, because, once you lose control of your creative work, once everybody on earth can grab it and steal it and use it whichever way they want, you've basically lost like a majority of your income.
Right, exactly. Copyright is so important for us. But you had mentioned before that the Guild responds to notices put out by the Copyright Office. What exactly did you mean by that specifically?
Oh, okay, that's really interesting. I've had a really steep learning curve on that one when I was a brand new advocacy liaison.
I can't imagine you learning something new on advocacy. You're like a dictionary.
Oh God, no. I stand on the shoulders of great people who came before me. There's been such a long history of advocacy work in the Guild. But basically, the Copyright Office is, so if people don't know what the Copyright Office is, the Copyright Office is an agency that exists underneath the Library of Congress. So it's an agency in the legislative branch of government. And what the Copyright Office does is it makes sure that this engine, this copyright is managed in the United States. So they do a variety of functions, but one of the most important functions they do is they register copyrights. In the United States, once you create something, it's copyrighted to you. But for you to really be able to protect it, if somebody steals your work and starts using it, for you to be able to take that person to court, you have to register the copyright. And
right. And not the poor man's copyright.
Exactly. And you really should register it as soon as you get it created, because if somebody steals your work and you then register it, you don't have as much gain in court. You really should register your work early so that it's registered before somebody steals it. But the Copyright Office manages these copyright registrations. The Copyright Office asks for people who create original work to provide the Copyright Office with a deposit, like a copy of that work that goes into the Library of Congress. So they manage deposits, they manage public records, they do a variety of functions. But whenever the Copyright Office wants to change this sort of very intricate, elaborate system, whenever they're considering making a change, or whenever they're wondering what's happening out there in the world of people who create copyrighted work and people who use it, what they'll do is they'll put out a notice. And there's two kinds of notices they put out. If they want to tweak the rules on how, for example, you register your copyright, in other words, they're not trying to change copyright law, which they can't do. Only Congress can change the law. But if they want to change like the rules on how you register your copyright, for example, we're considering making this rule. But before we do that, we're sending out this notice because we want to find out from all the people who create copyrighted work and use copyrighted work, well, how will this affect you? The other kind of notice they put out is a notice of inquiry. And that's when they're looking at a much broader issue, and generally one that would entail a change in the actual law. That notice of inquiry is where they're asking stakeholders, what would this really big global change mean for you? And what would the impact be? And what kinds of things do we need to take into consideration? And so the Copyright Office will take all the feedback from the notice of inquiry, and then they'll do a report to Congress. Well, they don't always, but they often do a report to Congress where they'll say, we've noticed that this is an issue and that people are having problems with this part or that part of copyright. And so, we think that this might be a good solution. And it's then up to Congress to decide to pass a law that addresses that, or to pass a change to the copyright law that addresses that. But it's really important that stakeholders, creators and creative associations and IP lawyers respond to these notices, because that gives the Copyright Office really valuable information.
Yeah, and so I guess that's kind of like what happened with the Case Act.
Well, the Case Act, actually, yes, you're correct on that. The Copyright Office noticed that or heard from people like us who were responding to their notices, that there was a real problem that people with really small copyright claims, like if I put a logo that on a T-shirt that I'm selling, and somebody steals my logo and sticks it on their T-shirt that they're selling, that the most I can get as just a little graphic designer is for that copyright infringement is it is a few $1,000 if the person who's stolen it is just another person like me.
Right, exactly.
That's a really small copyright case. So for me to take that copyright infringer to federal court means I have to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, because I have to hire a lawyer and I have to go to federal court. So
you just finish the money you just made.
Exactly. If I get an award, it's probably going to be less than the amount I've paid, which means it's really hard for me to get a lawyer, because a lot of lawyers won't take really small copyright cases because, your potential award is probably less than your legal fees.
Right.
So that means that individual creators like me, or small design firms and small illustration studios, are kind of stuck. We can't do anything when somebody steals our work. So the Copyright Office heard from all these different people, and it's not just us. They heard from songwriters, and they heard from authors, and they heard from photographers that, we've all got this massive problem. Unless you're Disney, you can't really afford to take a copyright case. Well, that's not entirely true. You can, and individual creators do, but the only cases you really can take are cases where you're going up against somebody with really deep pockets who's really done egregious infringement. So the Copyright Office actually submitted a report to Congress and said, look, we think there needs to be a solution to small copyright claims. And what they recommended was a small claims tribunal, like a tribunal that'll review these really small copyright claims that it's sort of similar to a copyright small claim, like a small claims court for copyright. And Congress heard that, and let's see. So we've had 5 times now. We've had legislation
only 5
initiated, bills sent to Congress to establish a small claims tribunal. And this year we've had the CASE Act, which does exactly that. It was passed the House of Representatives overwhelmingly last September. It passed the Judiciary Committee overwhelmingly last year. It's been held up in the Senate Judiciary Committee by Senator Ron Wyden, who put a stop on the bill, and we are scrambling to get the CASE Act passed. So actually, anybody's listening in on this podcast, if you could please contact your senator and ask them to support.
Do it now.
CASE Act. Yes, S1273. It's really crucial for us. But this is the kind of legislation that the Guild advocates for. It's really fair legislation. It's supported by both parties. It protects copyright holders, it protects copyright users, and it sets up a small claims tribunal so we can resolve these copyright infringement cases without everybody going bankrupt.
GuildCast is a weekly podcast series based on the 3 pillars of the Graphic Artists Guild: advocacy, community, and business resources. Keep listening to learn more about the Graphic Artists Guild and visit our website at www.graphicartistsguild.org.
Right. So is that the only legislation that the Guild is working on currently?
No. Right now, that is the big bit of legislation we're working on. But we have historically worked on bunches of legislation. Earlier this year, when the COVID pandemic hit, for example, we sent out letters to every single member of Congress and asked them, this is when Congress was debating the first rounds of relief. We asked them very strongly to please consider supporting small businesses and micro businesses. And a micro business is a business with, 1 to 2 to 3 employees. By the way, micro businesses are a massive economic powerhouse in this country, really needs to be supported. But the concern was that, the different forms of relief that were being discussed were for larger businesses. And we all know that the first relief bill that came out, a lot of much larger businesses snapped up all of those relief funds.
Yeah.
That's when we went into full-blown mode of contacting Congress and saying, that's not fair. We need to support the single proprietors.
Yeah, of course.
We're also very strongly in favor of legislation that's going to protect gig workers. People who are working multiple small jobs to support their creative work. In a lot of states, those individuals can't even qualify for unemployment insurance. Which we think in an age of COVID is completely unfair. In the past, historically, we've been involved in lots of different kinds of legislation. In both New York and California, the Guild was involved with getting fairer laws passed regarding sales tax. And so we've been involved in a lot of different kinds of legislative issues. The CASE Act for now is a really big issue because it's so important so fast. Yeah.
So I've always had a question, and this may or may not might be jumping in the wrong section, but what exactly are amicus briefs, and why does the Guild sign on to them?
Yeah. I mentioned amicus briefs before. Yeah. Okay. So an amicus brief. Well, an amicus brief. The word amicus means a friend. So an amicus brief is a friend of the court. And so what will happen is a big case will come up, and for us it's very often copyright cases. A big case will come up, maybe it's a copyright infringement case, and whichever way the judge rules, that ruling is going to have or whichever way the court case goes, that is going to have a wider impact on the community of creative people who are working. So the Guild represents graphic artists, illustrators, and designers. So what we'll do is we'll sign on to an amicus brief, which is a friend of the court brief, where it's basically a notice to the judge saying, look, this case will have consequences for this group of people, these creative individuals, these visual artists, because if the ruling goes this way or that way, these are the ramifications. So an amicus brief can't talk about the specifics of a case. You know, the amicus brief can't say, we think that the ruling should go in favor of Joe because Joe has a specific claim that Andrew, the person he's suing, doesn't have or can't meet. You can't talk about that. In an amicus brief, you're talking about a much more general impact of what these kinds of rulings have or on the larger community. And the reason why that's so important is whenever a new court case comes up, the lawyers and the court are going to look to the precedent. They're going to look to the cases before. They're going to look at how judges ruled, and they're going to look at the kinds of arguments that took place in order to decide the case, that current case. So it's really important that we weigh in to give a broader perspective. So where amicus briefs are really important is in cases that involve something called fair use. So bear with me. I know I'm throwing a lot at you.
No, man, go ahead. We all need it.
Yeah. So copyright says if you're a creator, you own the right to copy this and you can license that right. You can do whatever you want with that right, but it is your right. But fair use makes an exemption to copyright. And fair use says, okay, you can use this copyrighted work and your use is fair under these certain conditions. And I can give you an example. For example, educational use often falls under fair use. If you're a teacher and you're teaching students, like you're teaching your students a short story, you need to know that you can distribute copies of that short story to your students for the purpose of teaching without being stuck with an infringement lawsuit. That's an example of fair use. And there's various uses that are deemed fair. Parody, for example, is considered fair use. You know, you can, if you're poking fun of something, you have to be able to use that something to poke fun of it.
Right, exactly.
So parody is fair use, which makes cartoonists very relieved. But the problem with fair use is it's kind of a carve out in copyright, and it falls into a gray area. And we always want balance. Yeah. So we want this balance to exist where we want the people who create copyrighted work, we want their interests protected. But we also want to be able to have in in situations where it is truly fair, we do want people to be able to use this copyrighted work. So fair use, there's always a little tug of war going on in fair use between people who want to pull fair use arguments stronger, less in favor of copyright protection, and then we want to pull it back stronger in favor of copyright protection because we don't want creators, losing their ability to hold on to their work. So it's really important because fair use falls in such a gray area, and it's a hard area to understand. It's really important that the Guild participate in or support amicus briefs that deal with fair use in particular. It's very misunderstood, and a lot of courts don't necessarily deal with copyright issues. So that's why it's crucial that we get some stakeholders involved there. Yeah,
I definitely want to pick your brain on a whole another podcast.
No, fair use. I cannot talk about fair use as an expert. We need to have some really good copyright lawyers to talk about fair use. It gets very thorny.
Well, sounds like a plan there.
Yeah.
But you were explaining fair use to say something else, or I forget now.
I was explaining fair use as an example of the kind of amicus brief, kind of friend of the court brief that the Guild will want to support. That's a really good example. And we've supported a bunch of different amicus briefs over the year. I think, and a few of those cases have actually gone before the Supreme Court. It's very rare that copyright cases go before the Supreme Court, but we've actually had a few in the past year.
Yeah, we've been busy this year, for real.
Yeah, it's been very, very, very busy year.
So, with that in mind now, you bringing up the numerous things that we've been working on advocacy-wise, how do we actually engage the Guild as an organization? How do we engage in all of this work for so long, 50 years?
So one of the biggest thing that the Guild does is we work with other organizations. We're part of this larger coalition of visual arts associations, mostly photographers. We're the outliers, we're the illustrators. But a lot of the issues that photographers are dealing with are issues for illustrators and designers as well. A lot of it has to do with copyright. A lot of it has to do with being able to control your work so that you can license them. Some of it has to do with freedom of speech issues. So we work with this coalition of visual arts associations, and if you ever went to the Copyright Office and took a look at the different notices of inquiry, you'll see there's a lot of responses from the coalition of visual artists, and the Guild is a part of that. It's a great group of organizations. We're also involved. We're a member of the Authors Coalition, which is an organization that distributes reprographic royalties to associations, and that's a great group because the Authors Coalition includes different types of writers organizations as well. And the Society of Illustrators is part of the Authors Coalition. So we get to work and we meet monthly and discuss policy issues with organizations from the Authors Coalition. We're a member of ICOD, the International Council of Design. And in fact, I'm actually on the board of ICOD as well. And ICOD is international, and it represents design associations from all around the globe. So it's really, really valuable to be part of ICOD because what we do is we're able to meet with and talk to people from all different countries, and they're all dealing with similar situations, but really different circumstances. Yeah. So for the copyright issues we're dealing with in the United States are kind of different, but kind of the same with the copyright issues that they're dealing with in South Africa and in Indonesia and in Sweden. And so we've got this really great group of peers that we can talk to from all around the world. And when you talk to different organizations from different countries, it gives you a really good perspective on what's happening in your own country. And we're also part of IFRO, the International Federation of Reprographic Royalty Organizations. And we represent creators at IFRO. A lot of the members of IFRO are publishers, as well as what they call authors organizations. An author is anybody who creates copyrighted work. So illustrators and designers, by that definition, are authors. And so we represent authors. And I think it's really important that creators have a strong voice at IFRO because a lot of our interests are aligned with publishers, but a lot of times our interests are not 100% aligned with publishers. We have specific issues, and IFRO needs to hear our voice as well. But we've discovered that it's so interesting. It's just like all the different individual artists and illustrators and designers come together to be part of the Guild because they've got this network and they've got a larger voice. The Guild actually is also part of larger networks that gives the Guild a larger voice as well. Yeah, it's really meta.
Teams on teams.
Yeah, I have to tell you, it's absolutely wonderful working with creators from from different types of creative fields. I mean, to talk to like writers and to talk to photographers, it's incredible. It's really inspiring.
But I can also say from a music standpoint that like everything that you guys work on, like I've seen and felt the similarities and some of the differences, but there are a lot more similarities than I expected.
Oh yes, there are.
It's just so interesting to see how blanket copyright is and how many people it affects.
Yes.
So this teamwork is necessary. It's
absolutely necessary. And actually, Camille, it's wonderful that you have this music background because you bring all of that to your role as an administrator to the Guild.
Yes.
Coming up on this episode of GuildCast.
So this is opening up a really, really interesting area for us. And it's going to lead, I think, to a much broader discussion on representation. What does it mean to be the creator of visual works in a world of all different peoples and all different cultures? How can we represent different races and different cultures, but do it respectfully? How do we address issues of appropriation?
Join the Graphic Artists Guild to listen to the full version of this episode at www.graphicartistsguild.org. Thanks for listening to GuildCast. Coming up in next week's episode.
One of the things that I'm learning to do, and I know sometimes it's hard for us, is to say no. And when you say no, it's not about saying no and feeling guilty and feeling bad and horrible about it, but it's knowing your boundaries, knowing that if you're saying no, it's because you're actually saying yes to other things in your life. You're opening up for other things. And that's something that we really need to think about.
GuildCast is a weekly podcast series based on the 3 pillars of the Graphic Artists Guild: advocacy, community, and business resources. Keep listening to learn more about the Graphic Artists Guild and visit our website at www.graphicartistsguild.org.